Today, I am absolutely honored to collaborate with the Syrian American Medical Society and to host Dr. Amani Ballour. I want to extend a special thank you to the CSIS Middle East Program for leading this event. Dr. Amani Ballour's book and the documentary that was released based on it, The Cave, titled A Secret Underground Hospital and One Woman's Story of Survival in Syria, is a story that never should have had to have been told. In the context of increasing medical attacks on medical facilities that are happening around the world, it's a tragic story of incredible survival in the face of unconscionable attacks on healthcare facilities and the way that she persevered over 6 years inside an underground field hospital. As I was reading her story, and it depicts the chemical weapons attack of August 21st, 2013, I was reminded of the fact that at the time I was working here in DC for the Syrian American Medical Society myself. And the reason I bring this up is because halfway around the world, in Washington, DC, a city where people make a living making decisions that affect other people's lives, the kinds of information that we had during that attack were coming in the form of facts, statements from doctors about the horrible effects of the chemical weapons attack on Syria. And we were writing it into things like spreadsheets that depicted how many children, women, or men had died. At the time, the Syrian American Medical Society was sending in emergency medical assistance into these field hospitals with support from USAID. But the information we had didn't have any of the personal character and any of the true story that you learn from her account. So it's a real honor today, and I think a very important story to hear, because decisions are not just made with facts on paper, and to understand the human impact on people's lives, families, the fabric of society is what you get to learn, and I'm honored to learn and present here today by introducing this panel. This is extremely important because we have a geopolitical context where, despite the horrors of more than 900 healthcare workers killed in Syria, hospitals documented being targeted, which is prohibited under international law, and the ensuing cry out from the international community, I watched as my Syrian colleagues depicted a sense of cynicism that they had over time as they waited and waited for the international community to do more for accountability than they ever have received. It was a context in which, at the time, the US government looked and said, the geopolitics here are just too hard. They said things like, there's no hard choices. That's a refrain that we hear now when we think about other conflicts that are happening, such as the conflict in Gaza, in Gaza. So this topic is extremely relevant. One reminder, too, is that many of these attacks on medical facilities were done with the support of Russia. And that obviously, as we see in Ukraine, have witnessed, again, violations of international humanitarian law, which mean that we're challenging our system. So I wanted to share a little of that geopolitical context, my thanks for this incredible story that I am delighted to introduce, and to say that when I worked at the Syrian American Medical Society, the doctors did not want to be called heroes, but I can't help in the 11 years since and every day in thinking of them as that. Because heroes are people who are imperfect humans who wish they maybe weren't in that situation and could have done things differently, but who decided to wake up in the morning every day and selflessly go and help others. So now I would like to introduce our esteemed panelist. Dr. Amani Ballour is the author of The Cave. She managed a hospital under the most extreme of circumstances. For 6 years, she worked as a doctor in an underground secret hospital called The Cave during the siege of eastern Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus, saving thousands of lives and becoming the first and only woman manager of the hospital at the age of 29. For her courage and humanitarian work, she received the distinguished Raoul Wallenberg Prize in 2020. She reluctantly left Syria in 2018 and now lives in the United States with her husband and children. And her memoir, The Cave, A Secret Underground Hospital and One Woman's Story of Survival in Syria, was just published this week. Hilary Black is the executive editor of National Geographic Books, where she acquires and edits a wide range of narrative nonfiction, including Dr. Amani's book, co-written with the award-winning journalist Rania Abu Zaid. Dr. Hisham Naji is the president of the Syrian American Medical Society's DMV chapter and an anesthesiologist. He has volunteered in several SAMS medical missions and training workshops for Syrian health workers in Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And in February, he just returned from a medical mission to Gaza. And today's moderator will be Natasha Hall. She's the senior fellow for the CSIS Middle East Program at CSIS. Natasha has over 15 years of experience as an analyst, researcher, and practitioner in complex humanitarian emergencies in conflict-affected areas. She's worked extensively on civilian protection within the context of the Syrian conflict, including with the White Helmets and Center for Civilians in Conflict. I wanted to make one administrative note that during the conversation, if for some reason we have to exit, there are emergency exits outside the door. And again, I thank you all for being with us. And before our panelists begin today's discussion, we will watch the trailer of the Oscar-nominated documentary, The Cave, which follows Dr. Ballour as she runs the hospital in Syria's eastern Ghouta, a rebel-controlled part of the country near Damascus that was under siege by forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad from 2013 to 2018 and subject to heavy shelling and airstrikes. So thank you, and please enjoy as we play this trailer.
كمديرة مشفى كطبيبة أطفال أيضا.
جيب شخص بتقوم بتصير إدارة منيحة
طيارة طالعة قدم معلومات قدم لخبط
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أمورا بخير.
اصلا المراه ما لازم تشتغل نهائيا، المراه لازم تقعد في البيت.
هلا انا لقينا انه اذا انتخبنا الدكتوره اماني اداره المشفى بتمشي منيح، عندي خيارك خطا، انا ما اشوفه هذا الموقف.
والله زادنا إيمان أكثر، والله العظيم لا نستسلم له ولا شيء.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the audience today and also online. Every time I see that trailer or even parts of the movie, I still choke up a little bit. It's such a harrowing film, and Dr. Amani's account in her book is so not just thought-provoking, but deeply moving. There are a few accounts that I've heard or seen, as with the movie, that are so visceral, that really make you feel the anxiety of what it feels like to be underground while there's a war above. And Dr. Amani, you were in fact militarily targeted, because we do know that the Syrian regime was targeting medical workers and medical facilities, medical vehicles like ambulances throughout the conflict. We know of at least well over 600 attacks on medical facilities alone during the war. I know that in the north, when we were working, we would have mobile clinics to ensure that, essentially hospitals weren't, or medical facilities weren't just sitting ducks, put mud on ambulances so that it would sort of disguise their true usage. But Dr. Amani, you and Dr. Salim, who's shown in the clip, you went further with the cave. I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about the cave, what it was, what it came to be during the 6 years that you worked there.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you for coming today. The cave is, it's not a real cave, it's a basement underground. You know, in Syria after 2011, after the revolution started, the Syrian regime and its allies started to targeting hospitals, and they destroyed many hospitals in the area. That's why we moved underground to protect the health workers, ourselves, the patients, and the medical devices. So it was like only at the beginning, only 2 rooms underground. It was dirty place. We start to clean it, to make it, to prepare operating rooms and emergency room. And we expanded it year after year. I mean, we didn't expect that we will stay there for nearly 6 years. But after this, it became like a big place underground, many rooms, like a store for the medical supplies and medicine. And we make, in 2016, we start to make tunnels underground to connect the hospital with other hospitals around us and to other places, because it was very hard to move on the ground under the heavy bombing. So it became like a cave, actually. It was dark. There were no electricity always. We just, when we want to do an operation or a medical procedure, we turn the generator on. And yeah, it was dark. Actually, it was unhealthy for the patients and the children especially, because it wasn't like it's not safe place. Although it was underground, it was bombed many times. And once I remember in 2015, the warplane targeted it and it killed 3 of my colleagues. I was sitting with them and I just went to the emergency room because they called me for something, and immediately the missile entered underground and killed 3 of my colleagues and destroyed a part of the hospital. And we rebuilt it again. So yeah, we called it the cave because of this, because it was underground. Actually, all the hospitals were underground at that time.
Isra Ghouta, where you were, was also the subject of one of the longest sieges in modern history and the biggest chemical tax of our generation. On August 21st, 2013, the Syrian regime launched a sarin gas attack that we know now killed about 1,400 people. You open your book with this event because you were working at the hospital at that time. You were shaken awake by the ambulance driver to come to the hospital to see something the likes of which you and your colleagues had never seen. You know, death, injury without blood. And you talk about not being unable to see the floor tiles because bodies were piling up around you. And you explicitly tell one mother's story. You were a pediatrician, so you knew this mother from before. She had taken her children to you. But this time it was different. Her children had already succumbed to the chemical weapons attacks. And this particular excerpt really got to me, and I was wondering if you could potentially read this excerpt from the book.
Thank you. That night in the hospital, I witnessed pain, hurt, and harsh truth. A truth that froze on my lips and turned the tears in my eyes to stone. The truth that the Syrian regime had used chemical weapons to indiscriminately kill men, women, and children. I didn't cry throughout the whole experience, not a single tear. I was like a soldier or a machine. I was a machine. The bodies of children were piling up around me, and I was stunned, shocked, unable to comprehend, or more accurately, I didn't allow myself to fully comprehend with what's happening. From the moment that Abu Ammar, the ambulance driver, woke me with his banging, it was as if I was still asleep, sleepwalking through the whole thing. I stayed that way for days. I had a job to do, and perhaps that was the only way that I could do it. But now I cry a lot. I remember that horrible event like a repetitive nightmare. Except it isn't a bad dream, it happened. I remember everything now, and I feel guilty about how I acted, how I worked, how that mother had asked me to see her children's bodies, and I didn't go. How did I do that? I remember this woman a lot because I broke her heart, because I couldn't help her. She needed support, she needed her loss acknowledged, but I didn't do that. I couldn't comfort her. I hoped to see her afterwards to explain myself, but I never saw her again. After that night, she had no reason to see me because she's no longer had children for me to treat.
I think that that's a really powerful excerpt because we think about doctors and nurses being able to save lives under any context. We don't think about how often, in the case of siege and war and deprivation, that you're unable to save lives or even unable to provide comfort to those who have lost loved ones or who are in pain, who you can do nothing for. And this is one incident, but you speak quite a bit in the book about these incidents where children are suffering from acute malnutrition and there's nothing that you can do. I was wondering if you could explain, tell us some stories about what that's like, what you think could have helped from the international community during this time.
Well, yeah, the chemical attack that I started the book with, it was the worst thing I witnessed. And I think, we witnessed many massacres before this, many massacres, like more than a year before. And I witnessed like burning bodies, like children bodies with blood, with limbs amputated. We witnessed horrible things, but that time, the chemical attack, it was a shock because many victims around us, we feel like they are sleeping and moving without cries and without voices, and there were no blood. You can only see the bodies like cold bodies with dark lips and their eyes just looking up. And they were moving. It's scary. It's scary. And I remember the children. All the children have, the same situation. They all emergency. They all need help at the same time. We have maybe, like in medicine, like Dr. Naji, like maybe a few minutes to help everyone, or they will die. So the hardest thing was to choose who you want to help. Many children around me. Why I would help this child and don't help the other child. That's why I still feel guilty because of this. I remember I started look next to me, started working with the twins, 2 little girls. And because I could help them, they survived. But the other children, they died because I didn't choose them. So you can imagine how how I feel about this. I remember the corner in the room was like full of just bodies of children, and there's no space on the ground to put them, so they put them over each other. So I have no words to describe this. And I remember many people was calling me, and I just hear the voices of the people who want to help and the people who bring the bodies around us, and they ask me for help. That was like real nightmare. So it was the worst thing I witnessed. And after this, the international community really, let us down, do nothing after this. And that was also a shock, because after this night and after sometimes we just was waiting, because I was sure that something will happen. Many videos and photos was everywhere. So I was sure that, of course, something will be changed. They will end this siege or stop this bombing. It's unacceptable to kill all these people and children with chemical attacks. It's prohibited. But nothing happened. We were waiting to hear the news, and nothing happened. And in the morning, after this massacre, the Syrian regime continued to bomb us again, and they targeted a hospital next to our hospital with a missile or something, and they killed some people. After this, I mean, they don't wait, because maybe they were sure that nothing will happen. So that changed everything. It changed everything. It was like a turning point that we decide to depend on ourselves, to choose our way. I mean, that we want to stay here. Maybe all of us will die. No one care about us. But, you know, still have this little hope, always watching the news, waiting the UN Security Council meetings to have something. And, yeah, we stayed like this for more than 6 years, and nothing happened.
It's hard to hear, as Michelle was mentioning, the first-hand accounts. And it wasn't the last chemical attack, I should say. There were many other chlorine gas attacks that you dealt with, most significantly the last one before you eventually had to leave Eastern Ghouta. I'm wondering, how did this chemical attack, you mentioned it was a turning point, how did it change the way you and your colleagues operated when, you know, there was a massacre, there was a mass incident, when there was something that seemed to be like a chemical attack? Did it change how you responded in any way?
Well, we decided to depend on ourselves and to depend on the organization who were helping us and sending, you know, money and medical aids. And we make, after this, people in the Eastern Ghouta were like 500,000 people, make these tunnels to smuggle, you know, sometimes medical supplies, some food. We expand the hospital. We started to protect the hospital of the bombing with, you know, what we had there, like bags of sands. We just put it on the, like this high, for example, on above the basement to protect ourselves and the patients. We start to train the medical staff, and I mean, we were just a few doctors in the hospital. I mean, and all the staff, maybe, or most of them were volunteers. They are just have other jobs, or they were students. Just they volunteer to help. So we start to train the medical staff, to train more people to help. And also we use media, like I always was speaking, like everyone asked me to speak, to tell about what's happening, to speak up, to talk with all the channels, all like everywhere about what's happening. We try to do this. As I said, we still have this hope. We expand the hospital, we make the tunnels, we have as we could, I mean, like storage of medical supplies and medicine, the most needed. And that lasted to 2018, when also we were expecting a big chemical attack, because the Syrian regime with Russia started very heavy campaign, military campaign against us, and they started to bomb every second. So we expect that they can't do, I mean, anything. And yeah, they killed a lot of people. That's why we expect this. They used the chlorine gas, as you said. It wasn't a very big massacre, and people survived after this attack. But I can say we were ready to deal with chemical attack. I mean, no one can be ready, even maybe a developed country. You can't be ready to deal with many, many victims. Like, it shouldn't be allowed to happen. But we were, I mean, prepare ourselves as possible as we could to deal with this.
Thank you so much. I wanted to turn to Hillary, who's been editing the book. It was amazing because they've just met in person, but they've been working so intimately for all these years. And Hillary, you're with National Geographic, which is just, you know, down the corner from us, which is much more known, I think, for its work in the natural world, for archaeological, anthropological work. I wondered why National Geographic chose to really invest in Amani's story, the film and the book. Is this part of a sort of a larger mission to look at sort of the victims of conflict, the heroes of conflict, I should say, too?
Well, it really is, and I think that you're right. National Geographic is known around the world as a place that cares about the earth and shows people the natural world and helps us appreciate our planet. But though archaeology and anthropology and science and nature are the things that a lot of people associate with us, we feel that telling the story of the world is more than just birds, if you don't mind my putting it this way. I mean, it's about the human story. It's about cultures. It's about countries. It's about people who make up those cultures. And Amani's story was so powerful to us. I remember the first time I saw this documentary, I have to admit, I couldn't look at half of it. It was so upsetting. And we as an organization were moved to support the efforts of people like Amani and countries like Syria who have suffered under these terrible, terrible regimes. And we wanted to amplify this story. I remember after I saw the film, I thought, Amani needs to write a memoir. People need to tell, more people need to know about this. As some of you might know, the film was nominated for an Oscar. And so we're a few years later after that film came out, but Amani really dug deep to tell her side, the personal side of what was a very terrible thing experienced by so many people and to humanize it. And it was important to us as an organization to help her tell that story. It's what we do. So we're very honored to have published you, Amani.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for the work that National Geographic do. I also am very happy that you decided to do that. I wanted to transition us to a broader conversation about Syria today and more generally medicine in conflict zones. But before I turn to that, and I turn to you, Dr. Naji, I wanted to let our audience know that you can submit live questions, both here in the audience and at home, for our Q&A session, and we'll try to get to everybody. If you're joining us in the room, there's a QR code on your seat that you can click on and then leave your question. If you're live streaming the event, there's an Ask Live Questions button on the CSIS event page, or you can use the link in the YouTube description if you're watching us that way. So, Dr. Naji, I wanted to turn to you. You've conducted several missions, both in Syria but also in the surrounding countries. You just got back from Gaza. And specifically, you visited northwest Syria after the deadly earthquake, which just happened a year ago, and killed at least 7,000 people in Syria. Mm-hmm. We know that the needs are growing exponentially. There's probably at least 30% humanitarian aid cuts this year to Syria, even as those needs keep growing. I wondered if you could tell us about what you witnessed on your most recent trip and sort of the general situation for people we're approaching the grim anniversary of 13 years on this conflict.
Yes, thank you. After the earthquake, SAMS was one of the main organizations that actually the next day they were there on the ground. And we collaborated with other organizations, the White Helmet, you're all familiar with that, and the Syrian Forum. The White Helmet, they're focused on rescuing people from under the rubble. And the Syrian Forum, it's a charity organization. They deal with providing tents and other humanitarian supply. So the organization was there on the ground the next day to see what they can do to help. It was really big catastrophe. And the next day, actually, SAMS donated $250,000 to Syrian Forum to provide all these other items like tents and food and blankets and to the people. And we sent within 1 week we sent the first medical mission. I was on the third medical mission. We kept going like week after week, sending medical missions. As you know, we're all physicians here in the United States. We live here, we work here. So that most of us, we cannot leave for more than 1 week or 2 weeks. So I went there and we drove, of course, we went to Istanbul and then to Adana. We drove from there to the border. It was an eye-opening. It's all the way actually on the highway. You can see homes on both sides of the highways collapsed, and people just put in tents living next to the collapsed building. And when we got to Syria, what was even worse, the situation there, because actually Syria was neglected. When the earthquake happens, most international aids went to Turkey. And actually on the news was the earthquake in Turkey. And the border between Syria and Turkey was kind of almost closed, and the Syrian regime with Russia and the Iranian militias, they blockade the other border of northwest Syria. So nothing really can go in and out except through Turkey. So the humanitarian aid was very little at the beginning. So when I went there, as soon as we enter, the northwest Syria, we can see the same pictures of collapsed building, tent, people living on the side of the roads with no sanitations, no, like financial aids or food. So most of the, humanitarian organizations, went in, including SAMS and others, to help as much as we can. When I got there, I worked in 2 hospitals there in Bab al-Hawa and Idlib. Most of the acute injury were done by then, because as you will expect, with earthquake, most of the injury either death or crushed injury to the extremities or other part of the bodies. But we were still dealing with the patients who survived the earthquake, and the the medical staff were very stressed, very short of staff and supply. When we went there, each one of us took as much as we can. I took with me 4 suitcases full of medical supply. We were working like all day, operating on patients, especially like fixing broken bones that were not fixed right the first time, because the first phase was just to save lives. If somebody has broken bone, they can stabilize that patient, put them on the side, and deal with more acute patients. As Dr. Amani mentioned, that you have to choose, which one you want to work on first. So the first phase was to save life, and then after the second phase, I was in the second phase to fix the problems that were not fixed on the first phase. But driving in the area there, seeing all these tents, as your eye can see, hundreds of thousands of people were without homes. I know a story like one of the doctor there, the hospital I worked, he's a local. His family lives in another town, and he worked in the hospital. When the earthquake happened, he was taking care of patients. And the next day, he went to check on his family. His wife and 4 kids were killed. Their home was crushed. And the next day, he came back to continue to work. Those are really the real heroes. That they, like they say, they bite the bullet, they put a Band-Aid on their heart wound, and they take care of other people. It's very eye-opening when you see people just eat whatever's available, and the clean water they don't have. Sometimes they drink like not very clean water. Blanket was cold. I went there in early March. They don't have enough blanket. After that, the medical help start to come in, but even until now, it's not enough.
Yeah. It's so difficult now, and I imagine it's even more difficult because of the aid cuts I was mentioning. But Syria is also competing with other crises, some of which you've been to. I wondered, since the start of the Syrian conflict, more than 70 doctors have fled Syria, and in some places that's closer to probably 95%. How does this brain drain, you think, affect medical care for those on the ground? And what is SAMS doing to help bridge that gap? What do you think more needs to be done?
It's the whole situation there is very, very difficult, especially for physicians. There's no enough financial aid to help them. They fear for their families. Like I say, the bombing hasn't stopped yet. And so even when I was there during the earthquake, we heard the bomb came in from the Syrian regime that killed one person. So the doctors there, they fear for their life, not enough financial situation to support their family. So they choose to leave the area whenever they can. SAMS is what is doing now. There is a medical school there. We support the medical school to train medical students, graduate doctors, train them. We have residency program, fellowship program, to create new waves of physicians with different specialties to take care of the local people there. Of course, that's not enough, but we do what we can. And besides, we send medical missions constantly. Every few weeks, there's a medical mission, doctors from different specialties. They go there to support the local medical staff there to take care of patients from all specialties: surgical, medical, oncology. I was just reading some statistic during those in 1 year, almost like 100,000 delivery in C-section. So there, you have like 5.5 million people who were pushed out of their home from different parts of Syria. They pushed them all the way to the northwest, and even until today, there are more than 1.5 million people still living in tents. And when it rains, when it's cold, really a miserable living situation. So what SAMS is doing is great, but it's not enough. We need the international community to help. Like, for example, the U.S. should lift the embargo on northwest Syria to allow investment and also allow other organizations to go in and help the Syrian people.
What you mean by embargo is, I guess, the designation of various governing entities in northwest Syria.
Yeah, because no one wants to risk doing any big investment there.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm actually going to turn to audience questions already because we're getting a lot of really good ones in, and I want to get them in before the end of the program. But I would also remind everyone that you can still ask some questions. We know what's going on in Gaza right now, but there's other conflicts as well around the world, unfortunately. And so a few of the questions relate to what are the types of lessons learned, the innovations that either of you have learned in the course of your work that you think could help those still in Syria and also in other contexts, but also what do you think is sort of different, especially for you, Dr. Naji, because you've been to these other contexts as well.
Like you mentioned earlier, I just came back from Gaza on a medical mission. It was also an eye-opening, where the flow of injuries keep coming every day and night. And the local medical staff there, they just can't handle it. Like in the emergency room where you're supposed to have 6 beds, there were like 20 people there, some of them on the floor, and there's only one doctor and 2 nurses. This is unbelievable. But the people cope. They're real hero, and they're almost like superhuman. They do what they can. They invent, like when I was in the hospital there, things that we do normally, especially in my specialty, we had to create a different way of doing things to take care of the patient, whether mixing different medications because they don't have the one I need, or instrument. For example, when they have a broken bone, they need a heavy weight to put a metal pin in the lower part of the leg and pull it over the bed to bring the bone together, and they don't have that. So they tie 6 liters of fluid together to make like 15 pounds weight. They tie it with a rope, and they do it. It's just being creative. When you're in a situation where the whole world forget about you, and the supply is very little, but the demand is so huge, you're in a situation where you just do what you can.
Yeah.
You do your best.
Yeah. And then I would turn to you, Dr. Amani. What were some stories, I guess, where, like you said, that it was difficult to impossible to help at the beginning, and then you gradually learned how to innovate, how to make use of what you had?
Yes, I believe that we learn that the human beings can do things that you can't imagine that you can do it. Just when you believe that you can and you want to do something, and that's make me call everyone. Just not talking now about the politicians or decision makers. Everyone. When everyone do their part, when everyone think that, they have to think that they care about others. Maybe some people here say, oh, Syria, it's far away, Gaza or other places, that you have to care. It's a responsibility for human beings to care about each other places. So just do your part and believe that you can do something. So we can change the situation by this.
My colleague Will Todman, who's worked a lot on in the academic realm on sieges, has a question on telemedicine with doctors sort of outside of your area providing advice. I wondered if either of you could speak to how useful this is and sort of what the limitations were, if you had any experience with it. We can start with either one of you.
Actually, SAMS has a big program with the telemedicine since the Syrian crisis, because access to those local people there is very hard and limited. So we created a group of physicians in the state here with different specialties, so they can communicate with the local doctors there and nurses to deal with situation where you don't have to be physically there. Like in my specialty, I have to be physically there to anesthetize a patient who needs surgery. But for example, in an intensive care unit, where the patient is on the ventilator and their local staff, they have difficulty, they need help from specialists, so they can call somebody here and they can, like over the Zoom and video, they can see what's going on the monitor, whether different heart rhythm need to be treated, or any situation with the lab result. So they tell them do this and give this, advise them. And other things also from different specialty, oncology, to what medication to deal with, how to treat patients, and it's still, until now, it's still functioning, and it does help a lot. Of course, it doesn't, satisfy everything, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah. Could you tell us, Dr. Amani, did you have any experiences with this, with sort of advice from the outside, especially with specialist cases?
Yeah, I remember it was very limited in the Eastern Ghouta where I remember surgeons were use this. And, because of the internet service and the connection wasn't good in Eastern Ghouta, so it was limited. But I remember it helps with many big surgeries that, the surgeon needed to do this was important, and there were no way for the patients to go. They have to stay in the Eastern Ghouta. So I remember they did many surgeries using this technology.
And so that would be in real time. It would be a surgeon on the
Yes.
outside of the actually.
Yes, they were
relaying.
watching on the video using just a mobile phone, watching on the video and, giving advice.
Wow. Okay. We have another question, which I think is the ultimate question, to be honest, from Dr. Alterman, the director of the Middle East Program. What, if any, support is there from the U.S. government or any of the other donor governments for providing medical assistance in Syria, and what more support should there be? What are sort of the priorities? And I suppose either of you could answer this question as well.
SAMS receive aid from USAID, but it's not enough really. We receive financial aid from different organizations in some different country in Europe, but the remaining, I don't know the formula, but probably more than 50% of the funds come from individuals like us, the doctors who belong to SAMS, and also non-Syrian. We have a lot of good-hearted Americans. They're not physicians. They know about what SAMS is doing, and they donate. So we try to fill the gap. But really, the United States can do more. For example, now, like Dr. Amani mentioned, until today, all the hospitals that inside Syria, they're not really hospitals. Like, for example, now in Idlib, the main hospital, the biggest one, it was building for the government of Syria there. We just had to be creative to use the building, create an operating room to outpatient, inpatient, and intensive care unit. And some buildings are really in bad shapes, like a basement or something. We make it as a hospital. Like she said, because of the bombing, they had to go deep underground and dig tunnels and create hospitals. So now SAMS is trying to build what we call it SAMS Medical City. It's brand new hospitals, brand new nursing school, medical school, training, physical therapy, rehab, all these facilities. And that's going to cost like $19 million. We try to generate that money from the donors, local donors here. But the United States can help, and this is really a very good cause.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually remember when I think the chemical attack was a turning point for me too, and so I shifted to working on civilian self-protection strategies. How can civilians help themselves? And SAMS was an outlier at that time because you had so many individual donations, you could actually build underground hospitals. A lot of the other organizations didn't have the right to do that with the donor government funds that they had, and that was unique at that time. And then gradually, they sort of loosened the restrictions. Dr. Amani, I wonder if you wanted to mention something here, because you still know people inside Syria.
I have part of my family in Syria. I have relatives. I have my friends there. So in general, the health sector is in a good situation. And I believe, like Dr. Naji said, that the United States can do a lot to help people there, increase the fund. SAMS have a lot of projects there. For example, in medical education, to have more health workers, which really needed there. So they can support this, increase the funds, support the medical city. It's really promised for the area.
Yeah. $19 million sounds like a lot, and then it doesn't. It's not really that much in the grand scheme.
It's much less than $14 billion.
All right. Yes, this is true. I wanted to ask if either of you were able to share your experiences or lessons with people from Ukraine or people in Gaza, or if the lessons are not as transferable as you thought. We have this question from Tatiana Termakic from the Council of Europe.
The SAMS had really large experience. I mean, since I shouldn't call it a war, the military campaign by the Syrian regime in Russia and others against the Syrian people in 2011. We started with basement and small building, and until now, SAMS have 12 hospitals in northwest Syria. So when the war in Ukraine started, we contacted them if they need help, and they said yes. So we sent a mission there to kind of train them and help them how to deal with the war situation, the war injuries, and under a lot of pressure, under a lot of bombing. And I think we still have some 4 staff people there in Ukraine to help. And the same thing in Gaza, when the organization I went with a few weeks ago, PAMA, which is Palestinian American Medical Association. They've been doing medical mission in Palestine and West Bank and Gaza previously, but after the war started, they reached to us to collaborate with them since we have that experience. So now we're working together to help them how to send medical missions in a war zone. And like I said, I went on the first combined medical mission with them. And now there is actually a group they went there, started Monday, from SAMS and the Palestinian physicians. So yeah, we try to help others, and SAMS actually was involved even in the United States when when Katrina, when any natural disaster happened, whether earthquake or hurricane, we jump in to help as much as we can. I mean, we're not as big as other Doctor Without Border, but we try to help wherever we can.
Well, yeah, I was able to share my experience with the Ukrainian. That was also through SAMS program, training the Ukrainians about dealing with mass casualties. And I was really happy to share our experience in Syria about this. I mean, telling about what we do, how we, deal with this, our plans, our mistakes also. So I hope it was useful for them. And SAMS continue to train Ukrainians about this also.
We only have a few minutes left, so I wanted to spend those last 5 minutes or so asking Hillary and Dr. Amani. Hillary, since you've spent so much time on this book, and Dr. Amani, because it's your life, if there's a story that you want to share that you think really impacted you in a certain way that you'd like to share with the audience today, as we're approaching this 13th anniversary of the Syrian Revolution and then conflict. And either of you can start.
Well, if I start, I have to think about it.
Well, I have to say that the experience of working on this book, we published many different books across our list that are all fall within the National Geographic areas of concentration. But I think this book was one of the most powerful that I have ever worked on. It affected me so deeply. I knew that this crisis was happening. I read about the sarin attack. But to hear about it from somebody who was there, those children, I mean, it was really I would also say that just as an editor, I knew that it was going to be tough subject matter, and I know that when you're trying to help amplify a story into a world, it's sad and depressing stuff. And I didn't know what this manuscript would be like. But when I read it, I just started writing emails to my colleagues and saying, this is so good, this is so amazing, this is so powerful, because Amani was able to tell this story with perspective and with a complete humility that made it real. I felt like I was there. And just an experience of what it was like internally, I started telling more and more colleagues. And we are distributed, National Geographic Books is distributed by Random House. And I started telling some people on our sales force, this book is important. It's one of the most important stories I've ever been involved with. And they said, yes, we have so many books to read. And then they started reading it. And then I started getting emails from them. It's like one of these things where all of us who worked on the book, all of us who tried to help Amani tell this story, it felt like such an important thing. And I would say that, I was telling Amani earlier before we came out here, I'm not a big crier, but there's been a lot of tears in bringing this story to the world. And I'm so happy that you were able to do that. You were brave enough to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your help. Yeah, thank you. I would like, to talk about just a little thing happened before we left. Just a few days before we left, I remember my brother was the ambulance driver, and he just used to, after every time we hear a sound, he used to go and bring the casualties. And last time he went, and then it takes time. It was very dangerous outside, and then he came back alone, and he said there's a lot of people are crying on the rebels, but we have nothing to help them. Nobody there, no one dare to go outside. The civil defense lost their cars and their tools. And we left these people on the rebels, and we left after this. So this is a reason that make me tell everyone the stories of these people. I mean, they are voiceless. They died without, with no one care about them. You can imagine just their feelings. And I wanted just to tell this story to say that there's many, many innocent people were killed without sin. And I wished when I was writing this book, telling this story, that this never happened again. So to see this happening again is really heartbreaking.
Thank you. And I want to end with that last word, and thank you for all of your work before coming today and now. And it was very brave to come here.
Natasha, thank you so much.
And I know what your journey was like. And I wanted to thank everyone else. I want to thank the Humanitarian Agenda. I want to thank SAMS, National Geographic, for this event and for putting out this book and film. And I just, as a final reminder, you can purchase the book over here and have the book signed by Dr. Amani. And if you're watching online, you can use the link in the event description. I have read a lot on Syria, and I highly, highly recommend reading this book. Thank you.